Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show issue number 68.
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show issue 68, and we got a big one today. I guess this guy's in the house, our mighty mascot, and we got somebody else. But before we get into what's going down now, tell me what's going down, brother.
Oh, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you quick because I'm very excited for what's going down tonight. So everyone, please look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content like this episode you're watching right now. And gentlemen, I gotta let you take it away because I'm excited.
All right. Okay. Before we get into it, because we got the man here and then we got another man here. Steve, tell us what's going down today. Tell us what's happening.
You know, today is an incredible day for me on a personal level as well, because these days you'll notice that when people talk in no matter whatever sports or whatever it is, they always say, who's on your Mount Rushmore? Okay, that's what they'll say. And then people will say, oh, this, they'll do baseball players and football players. Well, today, if someone was to say, who's on my Mount Rushmore when it comes to comics, two of those people are here today. Roy Thomas and Gerry Conway on the same show at the same time. Right now, there's earthquakes going on. There's lightning coming down because there's a lot of power right here in this show. Truly tremendous, a truly personal highlight for me. Today, we're going to get into something that hasn't been heard in at least 1,000 years.
And you're right about that, Steve, because what we're going to do today is we know that we got two legends, but what is going to be interesting about today's show is we're going to document it for you, the fan out there, and we're going to put it out. Roy, you and another guy, the whole time, you guys were these big comic legends, but you guys also ventured into Hollywood, and you guys did a bodies of work that actually inspired people for millions of years after.
Well, maybe 20. I don't know. But yeah, for the middle and late 70s, and especially in the first half of the 80s, Gerry and I became partners in writing and, just as important to me and to him, selling, getting paid for 8 screenplays and 1 teleplay. Of course, there were a few other false starts along the way, but we had a kind of an interesting career. We met some interesting people. Saw the better and the seamy side of Hollywood. Gerry, of course, went on to do considerable work in TV with Madigan and Prescription Murder and L.A. What was it? L.A. Law, was it, or Law and Order? I mean, yeah, Law and Order. I sort of, at the end of that, I kind of went back to comics, and I did, okay in the 80s and 90s, and had some, good times also. So, but we had some memories of a few years when we were kind of crazy doing this stuff, and it's interesting because it was kind of comics related, and yet it wasn't comics, and yet it was.
Well, and so did you hear what the man said? That was Roy's side. So let's hear the other guy's side. Let's bring him out here right now. What was his name?
Gerry Conway. That's what Tarantino called him on the Joe Rogan show. Gerry Conway.
Mr. Gerry Conway.
Hi guys, it's such a pleasure to be here and to reminisce to people other than like people who are standing around me at groups, it's really something. Some of these stories I haven't told. Some of them I've told too many times. So it should be interesting for both of us.
We're looking forward to hearing it.
You bet.
So, okay, so Roy was the first. So tell us how you first got into it, and then how Gerry came along.
Well, in a couple of sentences, in 1976, I moved out to LA, and by a weird coincidence, because I had run into this woman who was a burgeoning screenwriter named Clara Noto in New York, I ended up that I actually had an LA agent for film without ever having written a screenplay or having really tried to. It was just dumb luck. So I can't, I was just lucky about that. I played it for whatever it was. I ended up in LA, and I got this agent. Did some work around with the Charles Fries Productions. They had done the Martian Chronicles and things, but nothing ever quite came, but several different TV things and so forth. And it was only about 79 or 80 that something like that, 78, 79, somewhere that somewhere in that first part, I got called into Ralph Bakshi's office because Mike Plug, the artist of Man Thing, Werewolf by Night, etc., was working with Bakshi on some movie. I never figured out which one. This is around the time of Wizards and before you did The Hobbit and so, or whatever it was, Lord of the Rings, and to do a screenplay. But in the meantime, with Ed Summer, a friend of mine from Los Angeles, I had written a Conan outline for a Conan movie after I had been instrumental in helping to get a Conan Properties Incorporated, and then later the idea of a Conan movie. I was sort of helped inspire that, even though I wasn't directly involved. But I got a chance to write a screenplay, and the problem is I had signed a contract that I could not write a sword and sorcery movie for a year or so because of the money I was paid for that little outline. So I had to tell Bakshi no. So I forgot about that. And then about the time Gerry moved to in '79, I guess it was, Gerry moved to the Los Angeles area. We was it 78? Okay. And anyway, about that time, in 78, 79, our agent, Dan Ostroff, I guess, when he was working for a writers and artists agency, got us an interview to do a movie for a company called Barry Crossed Productions. They had done a little sleeper, not quite slasher film, but it had that feel, called When a Stranger Calls. It was kind of a non-violent slasher film in a way, and they were going to do something else, and so I wanted to do a thing, but I didn't have a Carol Kane.
It starred Carol King,
right?
Who, of course, has become quite famous since then.
A young woman who was like a story editor for Barry Cross Productions, named Janice Hendler. And she recommended us because she liked, the comics and so forth. But I didn't have a screenplay to show around or anything like that. And, Gerry did if they wanted. So I said, I don't really care that much about the idea of writing movies by myself. It really hadn't intrigued me when I was trying to do it before. And I knew Gerry really wanted to get into it. So I thought, well, the two of us, we could have a lot of fun doing it together, split the money, split the work, and keep writing comics in the meantime. So I got Gerry involved. The next thing you know, we're up there, meeting and doing this thing based on a book I suggested to him that I had read as a teenager in the 50s. It was called Snow Fury. And it was basically a science fiction horror story about snow that ate people. That kind of sums it up, snow that ate people.
Yes.
And that was our first screenplay. Right? And Gerry, what do you remember about it?
I remember.
What do you remember about it, Gerry?
I remember that we sold the outline as, or actually we sold the premise, and then they paid us for an outline and so on. But what I actually remember was when we got the approval to get hired. This was on the Warner Brothers lot, and the two of us went into the back lot, walking around going, we're in the movies, because it was kind of exciting that we actually had made that this transition, or whatever. and walking down these streets that we had seen in films and television. It was kind of very cool, you know. Now, of course, you know, for I've spent 20 odd years doing it, so it's sort of like, yeah. But at the time, it really felt very cool, and that premise, you know, you sell it short, but it gave us a lot of potential and a lot of fun, because it is silly, but it's at the same time, snow that eats people is kind of horrifying, and we had to come up with different ways to make it work, and that was fun. And they ended up liking the script. I think we got some work, you know, additional work based on that script. Yeah.
How did it eat the people?
I remember one or two of the ways. Well, it was just some sort of lab accident, you know, bitten by a radioactive snowflake, probably, you know, something like that. I don't know. In the book, it was just this, you know, scientist invented something and it got out of the lab. You know, nobody ever thought of that before. And but the interesting scenes I remember where they weren't in the book. I mean, there were some scenes in the book there were one or two scenes in the book that were good, but there were about an old couple in a car, and you see them, you know, sort of getting killed through the windshield wipers, going and wiping the snow off. That was in the book. But there was another one. We had people on like the snow lift, you know, the snow lift going up, and they're drifting into this stuff. And of course, when it comes out, there's nothing but skeletons left on the other side, stuff like that. And our other scene is creepy because it wasn't just a slasher filled with snow. It was one where we have a couple of horses taking a couple or whatever into a covered bridge. Remember, Jerry? A covered bridge.
And,
again, and it's jingling, jingle bells time. So there's all this jingle on the horse, and it's going in, it goes into the middle of the thing, jingle. Then the jingling kind of dies, you know, as the snow drifts in from the other side. The jingling dies, and the snow drifts out from the other side. It was pretty good, you know. It was
some fun bits.
It never got made. I was never sure they even ended up contacting the writer to get the rights to the story. We don't know.
Yeah. Well, those were the days. Now IP is very important to the film studios, you know.
I remember at one point they got a little nervous right before we actually went to script as they were signing the deal. Janice, the person who had, you know, got us in there, said the guy Doug, who was the line producer, he stuck his head in the office in her office and said, you know, I haven't seen a script by these boys. He said, you know, I haven't seen a screenplay, a sample screenplay. You know, so are we sure, you know, that they could do it? And she just said, "Oh, they could write anything," and that was sort of we got vouched for, and that's how we got the job, basically.
Yeah, you know? We owe our career to Janice in a lot of ways.
Yes, very much.
Janice is an interesting person. I love her to death. Then tell us about, after that comes Fire and Ice. Jerry, what do you remember about Fire and Ice? Getting all that done.
Well, working with Bakshi was a struggle. You know, he's a demanding guy who doesn't know what he wants. The biggest thing that I remember about it was that we wrote a 2-hour screenplay, and we kept being told by other writers that animation films are like 89 minutes, and you know, this was considerably less by about a half hour. And we told Bakshi about this several times, and he said, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'll fix it in the cutting." So he shot it in rotoscope, which is where you have actors. It was a kind of a pre-capture system, you know, in which he filmed the entire thing in a warehouse with the actors basically in loincloths, and then he cut the film together, and the parts that he cut out were the plot. He kept all the action. He kept you know, the visuals, which, you know, made sense, and it's an animated film, but he cut the plot so badly that when we saw a preview of it with our agent and our lawyer, the lawyer came up to us afterwards and said, "Who was that masked man?" Who was the main, one of the main characters was this White Wolf character that we had created, who had a whole backstory, who was never explained. He just showed up, and our names are on this. And so every time people would talk to us, they were like, we like the movie, but it's kind of incoherent. And I think, Roy, you were the one who said, everything we wrote was in it, but not everything we wrote.
Yeah. It wasn't that we had to disown it. It's just there were all sorts of relations between characters and things of that sort that were. And one of the reasons, by the way, it wasn't just that we wrote a 2-hour script for the hell of it. It was because Bakshi kept throwing scenes at us that he wanted us. He'd started off with some scene about the hero climbing this tree, endlessly being chased by beastmen. He's climbing up and up and up, and finally he gets to the very top. He can't go any higher, but looks out, and he dives off the height of this, this redwood-sized tree. Dives off, and then we'd wait for Ralph. He says, "And there, you can take it anywhere." So we had to have him hit 1,000 branches on the way down without.
Ouch,
and then he had a scene about Sabertooth. They were walking side by side with the heroes, with grass in between. But somehow the Sabertooth couldn't smell the people, but he liked the visuals of this, and it made no sense at all. But we had to throw that scene in, and so forth. And of course, this movie was supposed to try to capture the art of Frank Frazetta, who was officially a producer, but we only had about one meeting with Frank Frazetta, whose work we all really admired. But the only guy I know who ever spoke of himself in the third person, about the real Frazetta and all this. But somehow I think he and Ralph probably had a few problems too, because after that first meeting, we never saw Frank again. I remember Gerry got up at one. When they wanted a rewrite, Gerry got up and stomped out of a meeting with Ralph because he was being so unreasonable. This was at some commissary somewhere. So unreasonable about wanting this thing in a couple of days. This rewrite.
Yeah, and he was yelling at you, as I remember.
I stayed behind, and Ralph said, "How come you didn't get up?" And I said, "One of us had to stay here." Go ahead.
I remember he was yelling at you. Yeah, saying some really insulting things, and it was like that. I can't do this. It was in a restaurant, and there were people around. And I started yelling at him. I think that was actually the second script that we did for him. I mean, we were actually
yes, you did.
We did 2 full scripts for him. And he wanted to hire us for a third, and we were like, "No, this is enough. Our lives are too short." Turned out to be true.
It came out, but it didn't, do that terribly well. And one reason, by the way, people didn't know who this character Dark Wolf is, because one of the things that Ralph cut was mentioning the character's name. So he is never mentioned by name until the credits at the end of the film, and you find someone played Dark Wolf, but nobody ever mentioned the name Dark Wolf. I didn't see that happen again until Conan the Destroyer, where Valeria is never mentioned by name in the entire movie. Right. They cut that scene that had been in there, but it was kind of sloppily cut. And the reason it was done so fast was because there was about to be an actor's strike. You remember, Gerry? And Ralph said, well, because it's animated thing, he could have technically kept doing it, but he said, I don't want to be the only director in town working with live actors during an actor strike. So he's pushing to finish it. And he was just throwing away pages, the pages that made the story make sense.
Yeah. He was a strange man. He is a strange man. I mean, what can I say?
Now then you guys go into Cage.
Yeah. That's the funny part, is that we did another script with him. Right?
Yes.
We did Cage right after that. He got us somehow, despite all of our terrible experience with him, he hired us to do a real live action script with him that we ended up, calling Cage. Yeah. I think I suggested that name despite the name it was already a name I had given to a character at Marvel, but I wasn't working for Marvel. What the hell do I can't remember about Cage. I'm a little vague on it. Was a Lost World story with a sort of a muscular Indiana Jones. That's about all I can remember. Really.
I think it was sort of influenced by a Robert E. Howard book. What wasn't Almuric, where, yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, Howard was influenced by Edgar Rice Burroughs, as everybody was by at that point.
Mhm.
And we were,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
it was a
think you were,
Burroughs
yeah,
Howard kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, it was, yeah, you know, I mean, we were, oh, and he had made the deal with a producer, a fairly well-known high-class producer, David Merrick or
Melnick?
Daniel
Was
Merrick.
that Melnick? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So yeah, we went back for more punishment because the money got a little better, and we hadn't picked up any additional work at that point. Um, but that led us. Both of those projects led us to the Conan film, to Conan, what became Conan the Destroyer,
Mhm.
working with Dino De Laurentiis, because remember, actually, it was Bakshi who brought us in to meet Dino, and never seeing Bakshi not playing the alpha
Yes.
male. Yeah, it was really disturbing, you know, because like, oh, you know, he's like he's praying to Dino, the man who did La Strada. You know, it's like he was, yeah. And then Dino,
Except, as you may recall, he actually said the man who did La Scala. He actually got the name
right?
wrong.
Yeah,
That's
it's like
you know,
he got it
didn't quite
wrong.
get the name. He
Yeah,
said, and he pointed out to me later. He actually said La Scala. He got the name of the movie wrong. Yeah,
right.
he was trying to be about adultery, but he couldn't quite.
Yeah, we sold the script to the Conan script to Ed Pressman, and Bakshi was, you know, I think it was angling to direct it, but Ed uh, ended up going in a different direction, as they say. Uh, he he hired a guy named
Yeah.
Ronald Donaldson, um, who was a pretty good guy to work with. You know, I think we were happy to work with him. We worked out an outline um, that Ed was very nervous about, didn't like it. And he was nervous about giving us notes, I recall. Uh, and we're like, yeah, that's fine. You know, yeah, we'll do it. And he's like, it was surprised because, you know, writers in LA had a reputation for being hostile for notes. And we were comic book writers. We were like glad to be there. And we were like, yeah, we'll take the notes. We'll do it. We'll make some changes. No big deal. And he was like, oh, this is really something. And then he sold the project. I think he got Barry Smith involved as artist on it, Roy,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Yeah. And then he sold the project out from under
Yeah.
us to Dino. Yeah.
With the
But
second version. Yeah.
yeah, and things went
Mhm.
strangely after that.
And Barry was kicked off right away because Dino didn't want to pay anybody he didn't have to.
Yeah. Yep.
Mhm.
And he didn't he didn't pay people.
Well,
He tried.
I'd like to
Yeah.
mention the story of how we got that job. Is that okay? Yeah. What happened is that I had gotten an offer when I was still back in New York out of that story I'd worked on, you know, when Pressman first started the whole idea of the movie. This is back in '76. Remember, the movie didn't come out till '82, so it was a long time in gestation. As Ed once said, he said that movie was dead at every studio in town. He told me once. And anyway, so I had become the story consultant, but I didn't get a credit on the film because it wasn't in the contract. And of course, so it wasn't worth the paper it wasn't written on. I got paid. That's about it. But it was good payment. And all I had to do was talk to John Milius, take a few notes. It was about 2 days of work. This is right after I got to Hollywood for what amounted to $10,000. And I thought that was pretty good for 2 days' work. I hadn't had that experience before. And but, you know, nothing ever came of it. Milius then decided he knew exactly what Conan was. He'd read a few stories and so forth. So I never heard from him again. And I just took, you know, that's fine, you know, okay, they paid me off. the movie comes out, it's all right. It's fairly good. And I like Arnold and so forth. I still don't think I don't think anybody ever captured a Conan movie really. But I'm sitting around one day after Gerry and I have done, we have Fire and Ice about to come out, and we worked on a couple of other screenplays by then, Cage. We got, and we have a little bit of cred, I guess. And suddenly I get a call from Ed Pressman. I haven't heard from Ed Pressman since he'd invited me to his wedding a year or two before. And he starts talking to me, like I was a long lost buddy and so forth. And I don't know why, but I know there's something behind it. And he says, "Oh, yeah, what are you up to?" And I said, "Well, my partner, Gerry Conway, and I, we've written this movie, Fire and Ice. It's with Bakshi. It's going to come out from 20th Century Fox soon. And we've done one or two other scripts from then, live action, this and that, adventure stuff and so forth, may or may not, be made." And he says, "Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Hey, we're about to start working on Conan 2, and you ought to come by and talk to us." So that's how we got the interview, is because he called. But I knew that he did not call to invite me and my partner or anything like that to come in to talk about that movie. So he talks another minute or two, and then as the conversation is kind of winding down, we get what I always refer to as the Columbo moment. You remember Columbo, the TV show? And
Yeah. Well, one more thing.
Columbo would always at some point song me of the being murderer and say, "Oh, by the way," and then he would say this little zinger that let that scared the hell out of the murder. And suddenly, "Oh, by the way," he says, "you remember that $10,000 you got from that I paid you for being story consultant on the first Conan film?" And I said, "Oh my God, this is great. He's going to pay me another 10 grand for a day or two of work. I'll take this kind of work for the rest of my life and never write again," And no, but he says, yeah. Says, "Well, I have a deal with Dino De Laurentiis now, and he's supposed to reimburse me for a lot of the money that I paid out in that first movie." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, he wrote me a check." And I said, "Okay." He says, "But it's he's kind of stammered a little. He says, "It's made out to you." So now I know why this producer has called me. He has a $10,000 check he desperately wants to cash, but it's made out to me. And he figures, is this guy going to hold me up and want 10% of it or 50% of it or 100% of it or just refuse to sign it or whatever? And I said, "Hey, Ed, you paid me. I got my money. I got no claim. Send the guy down. I'll sign the check." And, it couldn't have been 20 minutes later. I'm not that close to Hollywood. 20 minutes later, my doorbell's ringing with some minion of his. "Can you sign this check?" But in the meantime, because of that, we had gotten this invitation to sort of audition for writing Conan 2. And by sheer dumb luck, we got the chance. And then that was the start of the 5 drafts we did on what eventually became Conan the Destroyer.
Each one getting shorter and less interesting.
Hollywood. Yes, they were.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But there was one.
We would only show people the first draft after a while and everything.
Yeah, and Arnold, when there was the premiere party, we worked up the nerve to introduce ourselves to Arnold, and what he said to us, I recall, only slightly bitterly, was, "I like the first draft the best." You have to imagine that in Arnold's voice. "I like the first draft the best."
Yeah.
Well, there were some weird things that happened working with Dino, but the most disheartening thing was that in almost every single draft we kept one scene, which I guess was based on the scene that we're talking about in Cage, which we had this tower that had a circular interior staircase. Conan had to climb up from a underground river through a cave filled with leeches, through an open grating, and go up this tower staircase to the very top and fight a wizard, and then dive off the tower and completely dive down, through the grating, down through past the leeches into the river, stayed in every single draft because it was incredibly cool. And then the final director comes on the film, and his major note is he wants to drop that scene. And I'm pretty sure this is what got us fired. I have a tendency to lose my temper, with idiots, as Roy has already explained. And by this point, we'd been working on this thing for almost a year. And I was like, we got to do this. It's like, we got to keep the scene. And the director says, well, we have to lose it because it will be hard to do. And I just blew up and I said, we have to have something in this fucking movie that's interesting for the audience. And he said, okay. And then we left. And I looked at Roy and I said, I think we just got fired. I'm sorry, man. That's why we only have story credit on the film. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my fault.
Yeah, we had to fight for that.
Yeah. That was
one of the major contributions we made, though, from the very beginning, even though one or two other people have tried to claim it, but I know that's not true, is that, and I'll let Gerry, tell most of it, and then maybe I can add one or two things, but is that we basically were responsible for the major, I think, good casting besides Arnold in the movie, which was Grace Jones as Zula.
Yeah.
Before I said, I had made up a Zula, a male character in the Conan comic book. So when we decided to make up a black Amazon female character, not as a romantic as for Conan, we'd had, Valeria in the first one, so we didn't need that, but just as an interesting character, we made up the black Amazon character, we call her, and as a holding name, we called her Zula, because that was, a name of another character. But everybody kind of liked it, so it ended up being a different Zula of a different sex, in a different context, which confuses some people sometimes. But as luck would have it, Dino he would occasionally rent out a cabana in the Beverly Hills Hotel. And we'd go there once or twice to meet him. And in this particular meeting, it was the four of us sitting around a table, Gerry and myself facing each other, Dino on one side, and on the other side was the casting person, a woman named Jane Fenton of a very big casting agency at the time that cast a lot of major movies called Fenton and Feinberg.
Oh, yeah.
And so she's there. So we haven't finished. We're still working on about the fourth or fifth draft. But they needed to start casting the movie while we're still working on it. So we're sitting there, and the main thing I remember is when it got to Zula, we'd been very quiet. We'd say almost nothing. We don't, and so that's, but at some point, Dino is suddenly sitting there and says, Zula, he says, I'm thinking about going Asian. We just froze up,
Yeah. And his other suggestion
you remember that, Gerry?
was,
you remember what you said then?
Yeah, I do. I remember that when we said black, or we thought somebody named Zula might be more black than Asian. He said, well, how about Jack, God, it was this fairly well-known, very light-skinned model, whose name I can't remember. But I had seen an early music video of Grace Jones, and she came off so dynamic, so interesting. And I said, well, I think Jane, it might be better for someone like Grace Jones, and Jane Feinberg, to her credit, jumped on it. She said, yeah, we've been trying to think of something for her, and this would be perfect. Yeah, she was. I mean, her introduction, with the spear when she like jumped out of they had her in a pit, and they're perfect, just perfect.
Yeah. I have to admit, though, that scene that introduces Zula, where one of her legs is tethered and Conan just kind of watched us to see how it goes. That happens to be almost the only scene in the entire movie that I can recall that isn't based on one that Gerry and I wrote. All the rest were sort of based on what we wrote. So that our agent, when he saw things at the end, says,
Yeah.
if you took this movie and you played it and you turned down the sound, it's your movie, because it mostly, it was mostly new dialogue and a few little things here and there. But that one really good scene that they wrote was really good. The other thing they took was I had quit, writing Conan and quit Marvel, a couple of years before, and the last issue I did of the Color Conan had the idea of Conan trying to bring his lost lady love Belit, which was the equivalent of Valeria in the first movie in a way, back to life, and making a deal with a sorcerer and this and that. And the director, this final director in place, Richard Fleischer, who was like 15 minutes away from retirement age and counting every second, as he did that film, he wanted to see some stuff. So I loaned him this comic, and Gerry and I told him that this idea of Conan trying to bring his lost love from the first movie back to life, and making a deal with a sorcerer to do it or something might be kind of interesting. And I loaned him this comic. I spent 5, 6, or 7 years with producers out in Hollywood on TV and movie projects. Loaned them. I never ever got back from a single Hollywood producer anything that I ever gave them, that I ever loaned them. And the last issue of Conan the Barbarian that I wrote was no exception. But they did swipe the scene in the movie, and they fired us, but they kept the scene.
Yep. Well, they took what they could that they could use. It is a skill that writers in Hollywood develop to rewrite scripts in such a way that they're the ones who get the credit. You might keep the structure of a scene, you might keep the names of the characters, bits of dialogue, but there's a mental counter in your head that you're following. I've been arbitrated 2 or 3 times, and it's never gone my way. And it's because of the math. Because the more experienced writers and the more cynical writers know what to do. Stanley Mann, the guy who got the screenplay credit, was a very skilled rewriter. And he was told to rewrite us by Dino, primarily because Dino didn't want to have to pay us the final payments, and didn't want to have to give us the share.
Back end.
In fact, we were told that by they wanted us to write Red Sonja, and the production executive led us out of the meeting, our last meeting with Dino, and he basically said, "Boys, we want to protect you on Red Sonja, because they wanted to pay us less than we'd been paid for Conan, because he said we want to even it out, and it's like they're basically telling us that they're going to screw us over if we don't bend on Red Sonja. We didn't bend on Red Sonja, and we didn't get screenplay credit on Conan.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's Hollywood for you, huh?
Yeah.
So when the
Jeez.
movie is getting ready to come out, we had to go to arbitration.
Yeah.
We went into arbitration, and Gerry and I had to sit there day after day trying to show that it was our screenplay. Because it's the Writers Guild, not the producer. And we of course went. Go ahead, Gerry.
No, I mean, we tried to be as honest as we could. We tried to show that this was basically our script, and it followed the rules. Of the new writer had to write more than 50%, of the screenplay in order to share the screenplay credit. If they had followed the rules as written, we would have at least gotten shared screenplay credit. But as I say, these guys know what to do, so that they can slip just past the 50% mark. I had a teleplay.
Yeah.
This
we
is
did
this
get
is
the story credit.
yes, we got the story credit because they had to give us something. I mean, to show you how bad it is, I had a teleplay that was an hour-long teleplay, and I was asked to turn it into a 2-hour TV movie, and I had to, basically rewrite the whole thing, and completely rewrite it, and I got shared screenplay credit. I mean, it's impossible to get the first writer any credit. They always give something to the second writer, whether it's a complete credit or a shared credit.
We did have one little victory though, besides getting just the story credit, and it was a single card. It's on the screen by itself, which is a minor victory. Is that this meant we were going to get money from video rights, and I'm still getting small checks, and sometimes a few $100 a year or something like that. It's what wasn't it 40 years? I'm still getting checks every year for that movie and so forth. But anyway, the funny thing is, at the stage, what they did is they it turned out they had already done the credits for the movie. Somebody called us, probably that guy Fred Sidewater, or Fred Sidewinder, as everybody in the industry called him, and they called and said they've already done the credits for the movie, with just Stanley Mann's credits, and says we will give you all the money, that you have coming, obviously, for the story credit. That, like, they had a choice, but if you don't insist on our redoing the credits, which will cost us money, we will give you, I can't remember if it was $5,000 or $10,000 a piece. It was either 10,000 between us or 10,000 a piece, whatever it was. Reasonable money, and a lot more in early 80s than it is now. And they're giving us this offer, and Gerry and I just looked at each other while we're talking on the phone and just started laughing. They said, change the credits. I was very proud. We didn't get the money, that extra money, but we cost Dino De Laurentiis the money. And I was kind of quietly proud of that.
Yeah, that was a small but happy victory because,
But he still didn't invite us to the Red Sonja.
Yeah, yeah. I have the poster right over there. Well, I mean, we shouldn't sound too cynical. There was a lot of fun for a lot of those movies that we worked on. There's a dark side, to the business, but there's an upside, and we were pretty lucky. I mean, our batting average, I joked, was we had 2 films produced out of 8 that we wrote, and that's a great batting average for a writer in Hollywood. They must have liked us.
My wife and I were remodeling the house that had been hers down in San Pedro, California, and every time they'd sign us up for another draft, we'd tell the construction guy to do some more work on the house. So every $10,000 or so $20,000 coming in, okay, let's do some more work. And we finally got it all done on the basis of those. Since you count first draft and revisions, which is really like almost another draft, and then 3 more drafts after that, it would either did 4 or really untechnically we did 5 drafts of the movie, and and then we were able to turn the first draft into a graphic novel for DC or Marvel rather, and make a few more bucks at it. So and we got our own original vision in print simply by changing the names of all the characters besides Conan. First draft. It says, how come they made the movie they did and didn't use your first draft? We got that a number of times, but we never figured out the answer to it,
Oh, I think we figured it out.
Did you ever see that Dino guy down the road after that? Did you ever bump into him?
And then
again?
you went into
I actually had a conversation with him once where he was sort of giving him that we could we could send in ideas for Conan 3, but we weren't about to do that unless we had a deal. So that was the end of Mike. Maybe
yeah. I actually had an office above his office at Universal Studios, and I just, after about a year, I said, "This is silly," that I've been up here a year and I haven't said hello to the man, So I went down and said hi to him, and semi reminisced, for a few minutes, and I realized he barely remembered me, so there was no point, and he was a tiny man.
except for the casting scene, the main thing I remember about meetings with Dino De Laurentiis was we would go to that cabana at the Beverly Hilton, the Beverly Hills Hotel, rather, and we'd have to sit around. We tried to talk to him, and he liked soccer, so he'd have the soccer game on, and we had to wait. Now, to me, I can't tell when the dull parts of soccer came because to me, the whole thing is dull. So, but at some moment when even Dino knew, but he keep coming up, and he or his right-hand man, Fred Sidewinder, would say something like, "Oh yeah, what was the one? First there was no rats, and then there was no leeches. No rat." Gerry had written an opening scene with no rats. Dino didn't like rats. He didn't like the leeches in that one scene. So no leeches, no bloodsuckers. Actually, is the word that got translated from Italian. No bloodsuckers. We thought, well, we're in Hollywood. Of course, there are bloodsuckers. And
we were trying to figure out what he's talking about.
No priest. Because there are a lot of priests that just got no priest. Yeah.
It was an interesting experience. The one positive thing I used to say about Dino was
something about priests.
Yeah. The one positive thing I would always say about Dino was that when he stabbed you, it was not in the back. He stabbed you in the chest.
Sugar and Spies. Tell me about that.
Oh God, Roy, that one you have to tell. Just because you ended up writing the script with Carla, right? I mean, we were hired by this guy who.
I'm going to get that out of the way in a couple of sentences so we can get on to the X-Men thing. But basically, it was supposed to be Mad's first movie it was going to be called Spy versus Spy. They were going to try to get a Mad thing going like the National Lampoon had its movies going. So we were hired to write a live action picture based on Spies versus Spies, which is this silent cartoon of just two guys blowing each up others, every issue of Mad. So we had to sort of make up something new. Gerry wrote some really funny scenes in the beginning, but then he decided he just didn't feel it. So his wife Carla, worked, and we put something together. We had a big meeting, I remember, in the Silicon Valley when we were up at Atari once, and we had a big meeting with Al Feldstein not long before he quit being editor of Mad. And he was saying, this picture is never going to be made because Bill Gaines, the publisher of Mad, does not want there to be any Mad movies, just like there were no ads in Mad. He didn't want any of this stuff in the screenplay. But somehow the producers managed to sort of switch it over, and it became like just a general spy spoof. So we changed the name to Sugar and Spies, and it's just a general takeoff on the James Bond films, all the ones that had been made up to that point. And we did as best we could. We got paid, and that was the end of that. Let's talk about something else.
Well, the one other interesting thing about it was that the guy that we were working with claimed he had the rights, and it turned out he did not have the rights. So we got called into Warner Brothers, and they were like, "Can you not write this screenplay for us?" And we're like, "What do you mean?" And they ended up offering us half of our fee to not write the screenplay, And we said, no, we want to write it. Um, we want to make it funny, and that was when I sort of lost interest, in it. But the end result, and I'll always love this, was that the other producer on the project, who had never met us, when he got the screenplay, he was enraged, because his name was going to be on it, and Warner Brothers was going to see it, as a co-production by him. So he wrote a cover letter to Warner Brothers saying, I don't care if these guys are black, they don't write funny. We were neither black nor, and I really did write funny, and we hadn't written it. So it was like, what the hell? I didn't remember Dan Ostroff was like, how did this happen? It's like, and so for a couple of years after that, our catchphrase when we were upset with producers was, they don't write funny if they're, no, we can't, I don't care if they are black, they don't write funny.
Gerry, what about Dynamo? That came after that one.
Or maybe before. I'm not sure about the order.
Yeah, Doc Dynamo. That was a very interesting project. I think Roy came up with the idea of doing. Actually, we were approached. As I say, we were semi-warm at that point, and we were approached by Showtime that was looking for a 20-minute interstitial project. They called it interstitial because it would run in between movies. And Showtime at that time was primarily just, movie shows. And I think it was Roy who said, why don't we do a spoof of serials, old time serials. And that's what we did. And we came up with, the dumbest ways that these guys could escape the cliffhangers. And we had a lot of, I think we had fun doing that. And we worked with a guy named Dean Hargrove, who was brought in as executive producer. I later found out that at the time, Dean was considered dead in the water. That he had a contract with Viacom that was producing the Showtime show. And after Roy and I split up as a writing team, for reasons that now seem very foolish to me, we ended up going our separate ways, and I dropped out of the business for about a year because I lost complete confidence. I was having writer's block. I was, a mess. And I was asking people I knew for advice. And I asked Dean Hargrove for advice. He gave me an assignment. And that's led to Father Dowling and my TV career, basically. So a lot of credit to Doc Dynamo and Roy for, 20 years of misery, writing television.
Yeah, Doc Dynamo was kind of like Spy Smasher, one of the old serial characters like Captain Midnight or Spy Smasher. The one gimmick they had that I remember, they were going to film at least two endings, two ways the hero got out of the cliffhanger ending, when they started the next one. Supposedly they were going to have people vote, how do you want to happen? What do you want to have happen, or this and that? And then they would show, one of these things and say, this is what you people vote. Of course, they would have had to film it like months earlier. So it was a total, scam, but it would have been, kind of a funny little thing. We just did a thing and was just running around. I remember we had a villainess with a great name we came up with, Gams Gatling, a good name for good-looking woman with a gun. Jerry always liked women with guns, So we had M's Gatling.
Something for
but it
Dad.
never went anywhere. I think Dave Oakes was involved with them too. That was Ted Field's company. And Dave Oakes, the agent, had the guy who also had the idea for the Superman Spider-Man book, was the producer for that at Ted Field's and so forth. It just never went anywhere. But eventually, our screenplay for it we got published as a separate book, by a company, by our friend Jean-Marc Lefisier. And so there's actually a book of the Doc Dynamo screenplays. You have copies of it, don't you, Jerry?
Pretty neat. I hadn't heard that, but I should ask him to send me a copy in French.
The next one had Jerry idea, so maybe he can remember.
Oh, that was our last film. It was basically Seven Samurai with time travel, where a peaceful people in the far future go back in time to different eras to get the greatest warriors of those eras to come to the future to fight an alien invasion. Simple idea, great opportunity for storytelling. We sold the script for the most money that we had ever received from 20th Century, sold it to 20th Century Fox, and the one note from the head of story department at 20th Century Fox was, "Can you drop the time travel angle?"
That's the whole thing.
That's the entire plot. That's like, and we had to come, and we ended up writing a script that was basically just set in the future about peaceful people and a bunch of warriors. And I said, we were writing the Seventh Samurai. It's like, there's nothing here.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Jerry and I
more
had,
interesting stories.
When I had back when in the early '60s, I tried to sell Julie Schwartz on the idea of doing a thing with people from different areas, and Jerry had actually done it in a story. He had done a Justice Society team up, which used some of the DC characters from different eras, like the Enemy Ace and different, some Western character,
Jonah Hex.
4 or 5 of those characters, and he just had this idea about taking that concept and turning it into a movie, and it was great. Except this producer kept telling us, as one producer we were dealing with kept saying, no American audience is ever going to understand time travel enough. And of course, then Time Bandits came out. So Jerry and I went back to him. We said, what about Time Bandits? That's doing pretty good. This says, well, that's a fluke.
And then Back to the Future came out, and
of course, a few years later comes Back to the Future.
The Terminator. Yeah, it's Why don't you tell the X-Men story, Roy? Because that probably was our final song.
Well, I'll start it, but I don't know. It was kind of, Jerry remembers. I remember that it was weird because there was a Canadian company called Nelvana, named after a goddess, and this was a guy who actually had written a book that I had read, and Jerry had probably seen too, on Canadian comic books. And one of the heroines in Canadian comic books back in the 40s was Nelvana of the Northern Lights. So he had named his company Nelvana, and he had a deal with a company that we thought was a great going concern at the time, Orion Pictures. What we did not know was that Orion was like on his dying legs, So while we're writing the picture, the ultimate studio that's supposed to produce it is slowly dying. But so we kept going through these to one different version, and then we started a draft. And the main things I remember, and Jerry may remember more, is that they wouldn't let us use mutants as the villain. We had some other kind of weird thing that I forget what it was exactly. And let's see, they wouldn't use they used some of the X-Men, but they wanted a Japanese X person, but they didn't want to use the Sunfire character I had made up. They ended up with some female Japanese character. And Professor Xavier could walk. That was another little thing. Just as Jerry once said, he says, you look at that script, anything that's in there that looks like the Marvel X-Men is probably ours. Anything that doesn't look like the Marvel X-Men is theirs. And that's pretty close to what the final product looked like. It was a fun experience up to a point. We had to drive up to Malibu all the time to meet with this guy from Nelvana. It just became a depressing experience increasingly.
Especially because we made them a deal. I know we talk about money a lot, but that becomes your reason for staying around after the abuse, that you receive and the idiocy you have to deal with. The deals are structured. They pay you for an outline, they pay you for a first draft of a script, then they pay you for the first rewrite, then they pay you for subsequent rewrites, like we did on the Conan script. This is standard practice. It was, at the time, it was normal. They offered us money that was substantially less than our going rate at that point. And our agent wisely advised us, you can't do this. It will look very bad on your resume. It's going to make it difficult for me to agent for you. I highly recommend that you don't do it. But it was the X-Men, and we were fans, and we wanted to write this film. So we suggested, why don't we just do a first draft? Go directly to first draft. Don't do an outline, and don't do any rewrites. We'll just do a first draft, and that'll be our payout. We did 3 outlines, a first draft, a second draft, a third draft. It made us insane. It didn't help that at one point we spent a whole day working on a draft, a rewrite of a draft on my computer, and I pulled the plug accidentally and wiped out the day's work. Remember that, Roy? We're sitting next to each other. We're getting closer to the end. I stand up, and there's a think, and that's the computer cord coming out of the wall. And the screen goes blink. No. And then we rewrote it in like 2 hours. We recaptured it in like 2 hours. But by that point, it was really hard. It was really hard.
And
Very discouraging. And that was, I think, around the time that we were finishing up arbitration on the Conan film, which was extremely disheartening, because we lost something that we really felt was a shoo-in, for us.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, not fun. You went, didn't you? You actually showed up for the arbitration.
Oh, we got that story.
Because I was on
More
vacation.
credit, and $10,000 or $20,000. I consider that one of my major accomplishments in the film industry.
Yeah. Hey, you stood up, man.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I think that's the
It was
arc,
a crazy, wacky world. Yeah. And you stayed in a lot longer than I did. I did a couple of, but actually our last thing then was that TV thing, the Kung Fu. You remember Desolation, our episode of what was going to be the revival of Keith Carradine's Kung Fu. It isn't the one that came on actually later, where he had the young guy with him. This is one a couple of years earlier that didn't ever quite get off the ground, but they were filming it with the idea of him doing Keith Carradine reprising this rule. This was 84, 85, one of our last things. We wrote an hour teleplay about a town called Desolation, which is exactly everything that I remember about being on Kung Fu.
I don't even remember that. So it's like, it was very remote by that point. We were,
maybe it's just as well.
Yeah.
It's probably just as well for both of us. I've got a script at home, but I can't remember anything that's in it.
I was not in a good place. I was like feeling my writer's block coming on. It lasted a few years, so it was not a good time.
And I went back to doing the funny books and and so forth. And that worked okay for a few more years anyway. way. I mean, it was the bloom was kind of off the rose between me and DC, and I went back to Marvel, but that was never as much fun the second time as it was the first time. You know, we both moved on. Gerry became a very successful TV writer and producer for quite a few years, and I went on writing comics, and now I do alter ego. And the nice thing that happens to both of us is that DC and Marvel started making all these movies using our characters, and I've got a lot of money out of Marvel for a whole mess of different characters. Like I think Gerry has got twice that much just for Killer Croc.
Yeah, Killer Croc is my most financially successful creation. I have, thank God for the animated show, which made him popular. The Batman, the animated series, because it introduced him to a younger audience that stuck with him. Marvel, you would think the Punisher would be a bonanza, but it doesn't work that way over there.
But Gerry, you mentioned having a writer's block. I think many people forget that you came back and you worked on Spectacular Spider-Man at Marvel, which is a fantastic run. And believe me, I meet people all the time that say, "Hey, yeah, I like Amazing Spider-Man." Every now and again, I'll meet someone and go, "Yeah, but I was reading Spectacular, Gerry Conway." So you came back in full force on that book. I tell you, it was a fantastic run. I just want to let you know that.
Well, I was. The truth is, I felt kind of abandoned by DC when I was having difficulties. And they had a job, they had a business to run, so I understand that. So I was basically out of the business. I was writing animation with Carla, and she helped me a lot, and the two of us would write scripts together. And then, I realized that I wanted to get back into comics, and an editor named Dan Daly brought me in to write Thundercats because I had been writing animation. And then at that point, I became somebody that Jim Shooter was willing to hire. And I was very grateful to be brought back in. So my standards rose. I knew that I had to, really concentrate. I was doing too much work, at DC, and it was burning me out. So at Marvel, I tried to really, concentrate on those 2-3 books, that I was doing. It's not to say I was letting you down, Roy, at Marvel when I was working at Marvel, but just my ambitions were too great, for my capabilities. I was overreaching myself, and probably trying too hard. But at Marvel, coming back to Marvel, I was just grateful to be working. And I was fortunate, the two artists that I worked with. I mean, Sal Buscema and Alex Xavier, really were amazing artists for Spider-Man. Sal really doesn't get the credit he deserves. So.
It's kind of our run. Yeah, it's 8 movies. We got paid for all of them anyway. We got paid for the TV thing. And we could have done one other. We could have done Red Sonja, Gerry, as mentioned, when Dino offered it to us. But basically, there was our agent, Dan Alstroff, told us, he wouldn't let us do it because he thought there were a lot of other great things in the pipeline. And Dino, there was it was just the same deal as the Conan movie, except one little tiny detail: no back end. If the movie came out and made $85 million, we never got another penny. We got our upfront money, and it didn't make any difference what happened. So he wouldn't let us do it. And what's funny is when we turned that down for supposed these other futures, as Gerry reminded me later, that was the only like 2 or 3 months in the entire 4 or 5 year period we didn't work on anything for money for a while.
Yeah.
So we might as well have done Red Sonja. What's funny is whenever we didn't do Red Sonja, they got Ralph Bakshi to come in and write it with a draft of it with Doug Munch, although I don't think their drafts, were used either. Eventually, I think, somebody in the back room wrote something or other. They made this
Stanley
really awful
Mann,
movie
the
out
same guy who wrote our screenplay. The same fellow who wrote the Conan the Destroyer ended up writing Red Sonja.
Stanley Mann too he had a couple of good credits. I mean, one thing I remember he wrote was what was it? The Mouse That Roared, the Peter Sellers British movie. It was kind of a takeoff and so forth. And he had some good credits, Stanley Mann. I don't think Conan the Destroyer and Red Sonja are among them, but he did some good. He was a good writer, potentially. It's not,
so Richard Fleischer.
I think it was just that the director. See, we started off with we had 3 directors in place on Conan.
Yeah, and 2 of them
the first
were
director we had in place was
really involved.
Was Roger Donaldson from Australia. They brought over. And
and he
Roger
directed
was all set to go, and he had been the one who orchestrated this big scene about the dive that Gerry was talking to.
Yeah, and
he was so proud of the script that he was going to take it into Dino and fight for it and everything. And he came back and said, "Well, I'm no longer on the movie. Dino hired me to shoot a remake of Mutiny on the Bounty because they're filming it in New Zealand, which was where he lived." So we had a second director for a little while, and then they brought in Richard Fleischer, who had done 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and the Vikings, pretty good, but you could tell he was just riding out until he could retire. He must have been 89 or something by that time. I don't know. And he just, in fact, he even said things like, "Well, they're just paying me and I keep directing," something like that. And except for stealing my comic book, that's about the most we ever got out of it.
Yeah.
Gerry, what I wanted to ask you in closing, any last words about your because you also went a little further than Roy, but what do you say about your career as a whole in the media field? How would you summarize it, and how would you want people to remember you by?
I was very lucky. I mean, that is, I was in the right place at the right time. Almost every time I moved forward in my careers. You don't get to break into a field at age 16 because you're amazingly talented. I mean, I was, but you have to be in the right place at the right time. I had a friend in Roy who brought me into the field. I had connections that got me into TV. I bumped up through TV through other connections that I met from the previous connections. It's a crapshoot. Persistence and talent and luck. That's what I would say. And the ignorance of the odds. It's the advice that I give to everybody who asks me is, just don't disparage yourself. It's not your fault if it doesn't work out, and it isn't you don't need the credit if it does work out. And I hope that people remember me for the good stuff and step over the bad stuff.
And you, Roy, how about you?
Well, not dissimilar. Also, it's always my advice to people is when they ask me, and I follow up with other things, but first I throw them off base. You say, well, the first and most important thing is you have to be lucky, because in my case, I was going to do something else and suddenly I got a job offer. I was very lucky in that the Superman editor I worked for was a sadist. So therefore, when Stanley offered me a job, I didn't have any qualms or feelings of guilt, or not much anyway, about quitting him and jumping ship. But again, there's a lot of luck. I happened to be dragged into a project on the East Coast that ended up with me having an agent on the West Coast, which some people would kill for. They have to, and stuff. And I just sort of wander into it and everything. So I probably never appreciated it because I was so damn lucky with it. And then, but it occurred to me, I don't really know what to do. I have no great feel for writing scripts. I never wrote one. I didn't even have a wonderful desire to write scripts. I just wanted more money. And I like the movies, of course. And so I said, well, more money, even writing half and maybe half the money would still be a good deal. So I brought Gerry in. Gerry had and Gerry understood screenplay writing. So he worked. Gerry always said he could start any script, but he always had trouble finishing them. I could finish anything, but I would always get tensed up, with 10 different ideas of how to start it. So we worked out okay. He'd always write the first few scenes, and I'd always end up doing the drafts of the last few scenes. And in the middle, we just keep, going, back and forth. And sometimes it was pleasant and it was fun, and it wasn't. As far as being remembered, since neither one of the two movies we did worked out that wonderfully well, I'd rather be, primarily in my case, I probably, if I'm going to be remembered at all, it would be as a comic book writer and editor to some extent, mostly writer, rather than as, as a movie or TV person, because I didn't, stay as long or do nearly as much as visibly and everything as Gerry did. But either one, they're both good fields, and we're both very lucky to have been in them, and we gave it our best, and sometimes that best was pretty good, and sometimes the best isn't so good. But so yeah, just remember Conan and forget that I ever wrote Code Blue. That's my my finale.
Now, Steve, any last words with the media careers of Gerry Conway and Roy Thomas?
Well, it's funny, as someone that did have a brush with Hollywood back in 1991, I was dealing with a company called Constantine Films, and they were going to do a Silver Surfer movie. And so the stuff that you're talking about with these extremely strange people, I understand 100%. And, I think maybe you guys should have got paid a lot more for having to deal with these people for even 5 seconds, because I found them to be completely and utterly lifeless, soulless husks of humans. Just a waste. They were breathing the air that I required. So I think you guys really did an astounding job to hack it for so long and deal with this, because anyone that's in the comic industry knows how talented you guys are. And if you're putting an idea forward and then some guy is saying, well, yeah, I don't like the time travel idea, so that's not, come on, it's enough to put a screwdriver through your head. So I commend you on dealing with that room full of monkeys and typewriters, and I really appreciate it. And so, you know what? I tip my hat to you.
Yeah, man. I love when you guys just dive into it, give us that background in the whole experience, because we don't get to see that, right? We get to see the products that come out, but you never really get to see what it takes to get there, and just to hear the stories of the good times, the bad times, maybe some of the questionable characters, trying to make that wallet a little less fat. But man, it's so cool and such an honor that to even take the time and sit here and listen with you, Roy and Gerry, about these experiences. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I hope, for the viewers out there and the listeners out there, they take in what you guys done, and, the fact that, working in the entertainment business, whether it's comics, movies, television, it's all entertainment, it's a lot of hard work. Right? It's a lot of hard work. Things aren't always going to go your way. There's sacrifices and rewards. And if you stick with it, hopefully you get to the point where, you have those successful careers like you guys have had.
Well, thank you. I appreciate, the fact that we have to thank you back is because we really mean it.
You guys fed our imaginations.
I had one little story I want to tell, because I don't know if Gerry even remembers it. I remember, I guess, because it was important to me. Somewhere in the later stages of our 84, 85, and somewhere. I remember that Gerry had a really good idea, and it shows the difference between us and why he went on and did, fine work in TV and had a career for another couple of decades. And I went off into comics. It was a little conversation, and the main 2 lines of it were this: Gerry had a very good idea. I had just gotten married in the last year or so, and my wife to spend the evening at home. But Gerry thought, and it made perfectly good sense, that we should, find excuses to go schmoozing with some of these people at night, because that's where a lot of deals are made. You go out into a bar with somebody or whatever at night, you schmooze, and next thing you know, you're the writer. And it made perfect sense. It says, since we just, and he said basically quite correctly, we really need to be hanging out with these people, more at night. And my attitude showed by answer. I said, Gerry, I don't like hanging out with these people in the daytime. And so that sort of shows we went off in our directions. We both did okay out of it.
You also have always been really good with catchphrases, and one of your catchphrases that I quote to other people was about the run of the contract friendship that we often found ourselves in with people who are really good friends while the contract was on. So yeah. Yep. It was a business. That's, the show part is fun. The business part
that
is
wasn't
not.
the way we really were, Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great seeing you, Roy. I always, hope we can get together.
And thank
in
you
the
guys.
flesh.
And great seeing you. Yeah, we'll get together another time on something.
Yep.
One of these days.
And we're very fortunate to be sitting here, me, Steve, and Al, to be here and listening to you guys, because that's what we wanted. We just wanted you guys to express your times, the good, the bad, and the ugly with the Hollywood crowd, and we're honored for it. And thank you so much, Mr. Conway. Thank you, my buddy right here, Roy Thomas. You guys have been stellar, and thank you for presenting this to the world, because that's what we do. Let's see if we can get this right, Steve. Let's get out of here. Ready?
Boom!
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.